my name is Gosuke Katoh. I was born in Mountain View, California, near like the Stanford area in Palo Alto. And I was there for 3 years, and then I moved to Japan from when I was 3 to 6. And then when I was 6 years old, I came back to the States in San Diego, and that's where I started playing baseball. And to get into further detail, I got into baseball because I didn't speak any English when I was 6, and I didn't know anything about American culture, right? So I wasn't making any friends in kindergarten. I wasn't making really like getting to know what American culture was like. And my dad was had this idea to put me in T-ball. Um, and like if you're playing team sports, especially if you're 6 years old, like you're making friends, right? Like you're talking to these guys. And that's how I kind of figured out how to A, make friends, and B, like learn American culture. So that's how I got started in baseball. It was nothing like trying to make it to the big leagues or anything like that. It was just me trying to make friends, in those T-ball fields.
So if you were starting, on the baseball field and living in general in California, I'm assuming that it's a multicultural atmosphere. But can you speak to, who your friends were when you first started playing? Baseball. Were there a lot of Asian Americans playing baseball, for example?
No, I've probably came across maybe 2 or 3 Asian Americans when I was playing amateur. And obviously in the professional level, there's not a lot of Asians or Japanese Americans as well. So all my friends were mostly baseball friends, and all my baseball friends were American. So that's how, um, not only when I was 6, but also, going up through high school, I always had American friends. But I credit that a lot to how I started playing baseball, which was, T-ball, and like trying to get to know all the American nuances and all the cultural stuff. Um, and yeah, that's basically who my circle was. My circle was baseball and baseball friends.
Did you have a particular idol growing up? Any like major league player that you looked up to, or maybe someone else on the team or an older, kind of more local player?
Yeah. So when I came to the United States when I was 6, and that was when Ichiro um came from Japan to the Seattle Mariners. And I thought of that as like we both crossed the Pacific at the same time. So to me that was huge. That was like to me that was like, okay, like this guy, he's he's not only, in the big leagues as a Japanese player, he's also like communicating to his teammates. He's also playing at this super high level in front of all these fans. And I couldn't even imagine that, like I didn't know any English. He didn't know any English his first year. And yeah, that was my idol. But at that time I didn't really have any baseball aspirations or anything like that. So he was kind of just a role model in terms of who I wanted to be um as a person. In the classroom, like during recess, like I wanted to be kind of like him, as in like talking to all his teammates, talking to all the American teammates that he had in English. That's who my role model was.
So when you continue to play baseball, did Ichiro's style of play inspire you, or were you looking for something different?
I think not necessarily his style, but I'm sure you guys know, like he's very famous for his work ethic. And I think that's not only just him, but also embedded in the Japanese culture. But he was always, when I thought of, like work ethic, like Ichiro always pops up into my mind. I think a lot of people's minds too. So it wasn't necessarily his on-field stuff that I mimicked. Well, I mean, obviously, like, guys were trying to mimic him all the time, like running out of the box and hitting and stuff. But for me, it was more of the off the field stuff, well, I guess on the field, but not in game, but like in practice, like trying to be the first guy in, last guy out type thing. And that's kind of who I try to be, in practice.
How about routine? I mean, he's also so famous, for almost a ritualistic routine, right? Does the same thing every day, even kind of on the field, practice and getting into the batter's box and so on. And I remember, many of my friends would imitate his kind of, his famous kind
Routine.
of motions. You have to get
Yeah.
into the batter box, etc. But is that something that also you felt was cool?
Yeah, like obviously like he's got all these routines going to the box, and I also have a lot of routines now. But I think routines are good. I think it's good to create routines, but too many routines is also bad, I think. Once if something in your routine goes wrong, like you don't really know how to respond most of the time. So routines are good, but to an extent. But yeah, I did mimic a lot of what he did in those routines, which I think a lot of players did as well.
So could you tell us a little bit about how and why you decided to pursue a career playing baseball? Obviously, you didn't start playing baseball with that in mind. Was there a turning point when you decided you wanted to do this for a living? And did you have any other career paths in mind?
Yeah, so so like you said, like I never really thought I was going to be a professional baseball player. I started playing baseball just to make friends, right, and just have fun. But I guess the turning point was really when I got drafted in 2013 by the Yankees, at a high school in Rancho Bernardo, California, and that was kind of the turning point. Um, which is funny because like I didn't think I was gonna go pro until the moment I got drafted, which I don't think a lot of people really experience. Everyone kind of like knows like they're gonna go pro at some point, but I didn't. Um, but once I did, it was kind of just like, I'm gonna make it to the big leagues no matter what. And I think I had more of a drive within myself, because not only was I doing it for myself, but it was also, all the Japanese Americans that are playing behind me, and are still, like amateurs today. I always thought like, man, like if guys can think like if that kid Gosuke Katoh can do it, like I can do it. That's what I was hoping for. And the other question was any alternative career paths. And I always loved baseball. So I'm also bilingual. So I was trying to, if I didn't get drafted, I was going to go to UCLA, try to learn something in journalism, and do something where I can bridge the connection between Major League Baseball and NPB, Nippon Baseball League over here. So that was my alternative career path.
You mentioned that you were drafted by the Yankees. Do you remember, how you felt at that moment? Was it excitement, or was it surprise, or did it sink in immediately, or did it take time?
Yeah, I mean, it was 100% surprise. And I was watching. So the first two rounds of the draft are televised. I'm not sure how it is now, but it was the first two rounds. And the first round went by, and I was watching it just because a lot of my friends were getting drafted. So the first round goes by, and then the second round comes up, and I'm like, yeah, like none of my friends are getting drafted in the second round. They already won the first. So I was practicing in my backyard, and then I got a call from the Yankees, and they were like, "We're gonna take you with this next pick," and that was the probably the most surprising moment of my life, as you guys can probably imagine.
Did you know that teams were scouting you? Is that something that you notice, or is it? I mean, how does it work?
So like the scouting process really begins the summer of your junior year, and extends all the way up until the fall season, or sorry, spring season, for baseball, and all the way up to June where you get drafted. And yeah, like people were coming to watch our teams, but I didn't really think it was for me. Which is probably good because that there's like no pressure, right? Like those guys, that guy with the Yankee cap, with a stopwatch isn't here for me. That's what I was thinking. There was no pressure. But things started heating up probably 5 days before the draft, and from there it was just the roller coaster ride.
Did going pro change your relationship with baseball a lot? I know you were talking about how it was very much you were doing it for fun to make friends before. Did like it being a career change the way you look at it?
Yeah, 100%. Once it was my career, like at that point, baseball's a business, and like as you guys can tell, like guys are getting paid $700 million now to play baseball, right? Like it's not the same as high school baseball, and a lot of the guys will say, like amateur baseball is probably the most fun, and I think I would agree. Like high school baseball is probably the most fun I've had. Um, once it becomes a career, it's it's a different animal, and that's also why I love it too. There's a business aspect to this too.
We're kind of building on that. Can you tell us a little about your experience playing in the minor leagues? Kind of what was maybe the biggest thing that shocked you about the transition from this high school, more fun baseball to baseball business?
Yeah. So I think the biggest shock was, well, I guess there was really no shock because I didn't know what to expect. Um, which I think again is really good. If you don't know what you're getting into, like everything else is kind of fun, right? Like you're just kind of like hoping for the best, and you're in this like long tunnel, waiting to get out on the other side. That's how I felt in the minor leagues. And it was it was a lot of pain at sometimes. Actually, most of the time it was a lot of pain. But what got me through was, how I started baseball, like my roots, and that was making friends, making experiences, making lifetime memories. And I'm sure you guys are in college right now, and you're making tons of memories as well with people that you'll never forget. And that's how my minor league life was like.
What is kind of the schedule like? I mean, how does your daily life work in the minor leagues, from practice to your private kind of time, and then travel, and then games, and so on?
Yeah, so practices usually start at noon, and goes all the way. Obviously, games start at 6:55, 7:05, something like that, and goes all the way to like 10. So it's usually around noon to, let's say, like 10-ish. Um, and the bus rides are not fun. Um, Actually, I should say it's not really fun for the body, but it's really fun because you get to be with your friends, and like most of the time it's like a sleepover, right? Like it's a bunch of like guys that just graduated college and like guys in their mid-20s having sleepover parties. So that's how a lot of the guys took it. But um the body does not like sitting in the same spot for 14 hours, 15 hours in a bus. But you know, it's part of the life. And you bus to the next city and you try to perform, you try to outperform not just the other team, but also your own, you know, teammates, because they're also your rivals. And you just try to, you know, grind it out to the big leagues. That's what the minor leagues is.
Yeah, yeah. And the season is, you know, I mean, how, like, what is some, do you do very different things during the season versus off season? You take a lot of time off during the off season. I mean, how does that work?
The second, no, the first off season, I spent a couple days with Ichiro, and he kind of told me how he does his off season. And then, you know, I've bumped into a lot of, you know, big name big leaguers, Hall of Famers, and I've asked them like how they go about their off season, and everyone's different. And I finally got my own routine. You know, being professional for 10 years, I finally found one that works. And yeah, it's vastly different from the season. It's very different. And during the season, so you have 3 hours to play a game. The other 21 hours are dedicated to those 3 hours in a day. But during the off season, your 24 hours is dedicated to the first pitch of April. So it's very different, and the training is very different too during the season, during the off season.
So could you tell us how you felt when you got called up to the majors? And how would you describe that experience of playing your first game in the big leagues?
Yeah, so it was I'll just go through the whole thing. It was during spring training in 2022. And it was like the third to last game of spring training. And it was we just finished up a game, and I'm just waiting in my locker because it's like me or like three other guys that are getting called up that day. Like it was gonna be that day, and I'm waiting and nothing happens. So I get ready to hit the shower, and then the manager comes up to me, and I just hit like an RBI game winning single, and he comes up to me and he says congrats. I'm like, yeah, like I hit this cool RBI single. Like, I don't know why you're saying congrats, but thank you. He was like, you're coming to Toronto with us. And at first I was like, oh, like, you know, they need minor leaguers to like, you know, hit off all these big league guys in Toronto before the season starts. And he was like, no, like you made the team, congrats. And as you can imagine, like those 30 seconds were just like the longest 30 seconds of my life, because I was like, my emotions were going like this. But I was absolutely shocked. I feel like that's the theme, you know, for my life, is a lot of surprises. And a lot of things can go your way sometimes, they can go the other way sometimes too. But I immediately called my parents, and they were both very happy. And then I went to Toronto, made my big league debut. I don't remember a thing about my debut, which was just pinch running. I pinch ran in the 7th or 8th inning. And I was almost like falling asleep, so I had to just chug some Red Bulls in the fifth or sixth inning, and I probably didn't sleep until like 4 a.m. the next day, but it was all worth it. And I think it was a good debut because I started as a pinch runner, so like that's like the lowest pressure, right? And then I think I like pinch hit or something, and then I made my first start. So it was very gradual. So a lot of guys, you know, they're in Scranton, Pennsylvania one day, and the next day they're in the Bronx, and that wasn't my case. I didn't really get thrown into the fire, which was good. It was kind of just like gradually making my way up to my starting lineup debut. So that was kind of long, but that was my whole experience.
We see the video of your hit off Michael Wacha, and I absolutely love that video. I keep watching it over and over again. But can you describe your feelings? Do you remember the feelings when you hit that double? And also, it seems like in the video, your teammates came to congratulate you afterwards. You know, Vladdy and George Springer and some of your teammates. And I'm just wondering if you could kind of recount, your feelings that day with the hit and afterwards.
Yeah. So I'm the type of guy that doesn't really get happy from my own success. And I think that a lot of that has to do with me being in minor league baseball for almost 10 seasons. And I found a way to find happiness in other people's success, which is, I think, a really important trait in being a professional baseball player, because you're failing, 7, 8 times out of 10. And if you can find happiness other ways, it's best to do that. So when I got the hit, I wasn't really happy about the hit. I was happy that I can get in scoring position for the next guy. But when I looked in the dugout and I saw Bo Bichette, who I played with coming up all through the minor leagues, I played against him from 2017, 17, 18, 19, 20, like all those years, 21. I saw Bo Bichette, I saw Kevin Biggio, I saw Vladdy, all three of those guys. Espinal was in that group that I played against coming up through the minor leagues. And we've had these talks, I played against them, so it's just like, we're all gonna make the big leagues, right? Like we're gonna try to, we're gonna do it together. And they're on the other team, but I always thought I was gonna go with the Yankees, but I look in the dugout and they know my story. I know their story. No one needs to talk about that. And the way that they were so happy for me brought me to tears. That was probably one of the most emotional moments of my life, was looking in that dugout and seeing how happy they were for me, because they know what I've been through. And the next half inning, I was crying. So, I couldn't really see it. If there was a ground ball hit to me, I was screwed, but I think it was worth it.
And were you a shortstop that day? Do you remember that?
Second base.
Second base. So did you get any balls hit your direction?
No ground balls that half inning, so we were good.
So you've talked a little bit about how all these major turning points in your career have been surprising to you. Was your transition from American baseball to Japanese baseball also surprising, or was that more of like an active choice that you made?
Yeah, so I got drafted over to Japan, which is extremely rare. I think it was me and two other guys that have played in the United States and gotten drafted here, and I believe I'm the only player to be drafted in both leagues. So that's very surprising. Like I never thought I was going to get drafted here. And in terms of the on place or the on field stuff, I was very shocked to see how different baseball is played in two different countries. It's the same sport, but it's also completely different. And it's very challenging, as it should be. And but I think I embrace the challenge, and I love challenges. I think humans love challenges. Like human nature, we just love challenges. That's why we like all those challenges on all those, stupid phone games we play and stuff like that. But my challenge has always been to try to be the best player I can be with this body that I was given, and to do it in a different country is really truly a blessing.
Do you remember going back to being drafted for the Fighters?
Oh yeah.
I mean, you said you didn't expect that, but in retrospect, do you get a sense that they were looking at you and considering you? And I'm just wondering if you could also describe your feelings, if you remember at that moment that you got the call.
Yeah. So I didn't see this coming at all. There was some news that they were interested in drafting me with about a month before the draft. But my draft experience in Major League Baseball was I was getting a phone call. I was getting drafted while I was hitting. I wasn't even watching the TV broadcast. In this case, coming to or getting drafted in Japan, I was asleep, so like that was extremely surprising as well, waking up and seeing my name on the draft boards. I was getting messages from all the Japanese guys and all the Fighters guys, and so yeah, I was practicing in my first draft, and in my second draft I was sleeping because of the time change. So you can imagine how surprised I was when I woke up.
You talked a little bit about the differences between baseball in the US and Japan. Could you potentially elaborate on those a little more? And what do you think was the biggest difference between the two?
Yeah. So the best way to put it, I think, you can ask any player that has played in both leagues, and they'll all agree that it is a completely different sport. And if you really dig deep into it, like the strike zones are different. The balls are different. The bases are different. The big league bases are bigger. So I mean, they just changed that this past year, I think. And if the bases are bigger, the base paths are shorter, right? So like I can keep going on, and like everything is different. But I think the biggest difference is as me as a hitter, I think it is the way that players are attacked in terms of hitting. And in the United States, it's really just me versus the pitcher. And the pitcher's going to try to overpower me. And there are some at bats, and I'm sure you guys have seen all these at bats on TV. The hitter has no chance to hit the ball sometimes, because it's just humanly impossible to react that fast. And that every player has experienced that in the big leagues. But in Japan, it's not me against the pitcher, it's me against the catcher. It's me against that guy that's sitting back there. And he's gonna try to outsmart me, and I'm gonna try to outsmart him. And whoever wins that battle is gonna be successful. And that's I think what the biggest difference is between MLB and NPB.
In Japan, there's a greater emphasis on small ball instead of the long ball. Do you think that's very true, or is it a little bit too simplistic?
I think it's pretty simplistic, because I think the way people see it is there are more home runs in MLB than NPB, and that's a staggering difference. You see the Braves line up and they're all hitting like 30, 40, 50 home runs. And I don't think I've seen a team in the NPB that is more than four guys with double-digit home runs. But if you think of it the opposite way, that means that home runs are more valuable in Japan, in NPB, than MLB. So I think there is an emphasis on small ball, but the long ball is there's more value to the long ball than there is in MLB. So I think the tides are changing. But it's definitely and analytically too, I feel like I'm kind of in the future in terms of MLB and NPB, because the NPB right now in terms of analytics reminds me of probably like 6-7 years ago when I was with the Yankees. And these analytics things, they come in waves, and it's very similar to what I experienced with the Yankees coming up through the minor leagues.
So in terms of, say, we also hear about how in the US, baseball is much more data driven, more scientifically controlled, or studied than Japan. Do you think in Japan too it's equally data driven and kind of scientifically managed at this point?
No, I think Japan is around 6-7 years behind MLB, and that has a lot to do with a lot of things, and a lot of it has to do with the business aspect of baseball. There's just not a lot of resources available to Japanese teams that are available to MLB teams, and that's a big thing. But when I was in the big leagues with Toronto, everything was analytically driven. And for me as a player, as a bench player, that was really good for me, because I was put into situations where I was meant to succeed. And I think that's what analytics is. It's putting you in a position to that you will most likely succeed in. And that's important, because you only get a few chances in the big leagues. And if you're, getting thrown in there against, I'm a lefty, and like if I'm going up against Josh Hader, like if I'm pinch hitting against Josh Hader, like I got no chance. But with the Blue Jays, like I was going up against guys where my bat path would match the other guy, the pitcher's fastball, and that gives you a lot of confidence too. Like, if the analytics say I'm supposed to succeed, like like that little ounce of confidence goes a long ways. And I hope Japanese baseball catches up, and it'll never catch up, but it'll get to that point at some time.
I think some of the other players that we've talked to as a part of this project have mentioned really stark differences in team culture and the way that players interact with each other kind of on the field and in the dugout. Have you noticed any differences between like kind of in team culture in the United States versus in Japan?
Yeah, so I think my first experience with that was not necessarily like a baseball thing, but it was more of like just just Japanese people and American people and what the culture is. And me being Japanese, I thought I knew the culture, but I've only really experienced it with my family. So there's a lot of other things that I've never seen. And this was one of the first games in spring training. And I'm going up to like high five someone that just had a good at bat or something. I don't really remember. But guys in Japan don't really high five, and they don't high five, and they don't really hug. So the guy didn't give me a high five because that's not really Japanese culture. Japanese culture, you don't really touch each other. And at first I was like, whoa, like this guy hates me, but after learning a lot of other things, learned that guys don't really high five over here. And that was those little stressful things really add up. And that's why I have so much respect for Americans and foreigners that come over here on 1-year contracts. You only get one shot. You get 1 year, and you're learning a new language, you're learning a new culture, you're learning a new sport essentially, and you got to put up the numbers. So I think I have a lot of respect for those guys.
Yeah, I must say, I was born and raised in Japan, and I'm living in the US now. And one of the toughest things for me was to, shake hands to say hello, right? I was so used to no contact bowing, or, instead of shaking hands, the first step of kind of stretching your arm. That was the toughest thing for me for, I don't know, maybe for about 10 years.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of the people that are like listening to this right now or watching this, they probably don't think it's a big deal. And in the grand scheme of things, it's really not. But if you have those little things that add up, and you're trying to hit a ball in 0.15 seconds, it's really tough.
About team culture, I'm wondering if what you think about the Fighters compared to the other NPB teams. I mean, you have a team that's led by a manager or coach, who has Tsuyoshi Shinjo, who has had experience, playing in the majors, and he seems to be in some ways much more Americanized than other baseball players in Japan. I mean, the Fighters also had Hideki Kuriyama, for example, who nurtured Ohtani. So as an outsider, I get a feeling that the Fighters might have a slightly different team culture compared to, say, the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak for other teams because I don't really know them, and this was my first year. But after talking to a bunch of other players that have experienced a lot of different teams, including the Fighters, they say that the Fighters are the most like liberal thinking, I guess. We are very forward thinking, we're very innovative, and we're very Americanized, is what a lot of guys will say. I think that has a lot to do with our ownership and our GM, as well as our geography as well. Our GM was in the United States as well, for the Detroit Tigers, And then you mentioned Shinjo-san, and he played in the States for the Giants and for the Mets, I think. And he's a big reason why I'm here. And he gets my struggles, right? Like no one else understands my struggles more than him because he's experienced the big leagues, he's experienced the minor leagues, and he's experienced baseball in Japan. So he gets it, and he gets what I'm going through, which is good to have as a manager. And in terms of our ownership in our geography, I'm not really sure if you guys have really seen the map of Japan, but where I'm at is Hokkaido, and it's very north. It's the northernmost island, and it's an island. It's a big island. So we're not connected by any other landmass. So I like to think of it kind of like the Blue Jays, where they kind of own the entire region of Canada. And all the Canadians love the Toronto Blue Jays, and all of Hokkaido, which is a massive island, they love the Nippon-Ham Fighters in Sapporo. And the geography really has a lot to do with what our team culture is. And our team culture is really like, we think outside the box, and we don't really care what other people think about us. You know, like we're on our own little island, and we're gonna do our own thing that we think is gonna bring us the most success, not just next year, but you know, maybe 10 years from now too. And if you really think about it, geography has a lot to do with the identity and the cultures of American teams as well. And you look at, you know, the San Diego Padres, you look at the Hollywood Los Angeles Dodgers, you look at the Philadelphia Phillies, you look at the New York Mets and the New York Yankees. Like they're both New York, but they both have very different identities. And I think we hold our identity very well.
You've talked a little bit about how innovative kind of your team in Japan is, maybe as compared to some other teams. Have you noticed any other differences in coaching style, either within your team and other Japanese teams, or kind of Japanese coaching styles versus American?
Yeah, like again, I can't really speak on the other teams, but from what I've heard, our team really respects the players. Like the players have a lot of power, and that's because the coaches and the managers really trust us. They tend to think that we're professional baseball players because not only because we're good at the sport, but because we know ourselves the best. Not just on the field, but also off the field. And the respect, you know, obviously they also demand the respect as well because they respect us. So it's a very respectful culture. It's a respectful coach-player relationship. But from what I've heard, that's not the case for every Japanese team. And the coaches hold a lot of power in Japanese baseball, and to me, I don't think that's a good thing. There's a lot of coaching philosophies, but I think communication is one of the biggest you know, assets of coaching, I think. And in the major leagues, it's almost like flipped. You know, like players have more power than the coaches, which is why you'll see coaches get fired before players. And that's not essentially the case over here in Japan too. If a whole team's not doing well, like the coach isn't getting fired, it's usually the players. And I'm very biased, obviously, because I'm a player. I want all the players to do well. But yeah, I think that's a big difference in coaching. I think that might be Sam, I think that might be the biggest difference between Japan and Major League Baseball.
How about practice? I mean, we hear that in Japan, there's much more time devoted to practicing than in the US. But do you feel that that's very true, or is it not so?
Yeah, I think the player load is a lot more than in Japan than in the United States. And I think that's good for Japanese players because that's what they're all used to. They're all used to, practicing from, daylight or sunrise to sunset. Like that's what they're used to. And anything else, they don't feel as confident going into games. Like they need to get that work in, even though it may not be, as beneficial come, game time at 7:05. At that point, confidence, whatever gives you the most confidence going into that first pitch is what you should do. And most guys can't get that confidence, swinging the bat 20 times, like what a big leaguer might do, 20, 50 times. They need to swing the bat 100, 150 times before even the first pitch. But for me, coming from a more Americanized thinking, there are more data-driven scientific ways to achieve the same success that Japanese players are having. But there is something to practicing for so much, swinging the bat 1,000 times a day. It's not necessarily muscle memory, but it's more so knowing how to move your body to generate your best swing, or best pitch. And you ask these guys in the States, like, hey, like, what are you doing with your lower half? Why is your lower half so good? How are you getting so much separation between your torso and your hips? And guys will be able to answer that just like that in Major League Baseball. And then you go to Japan and you ask the same questions, like, hey, how is your lower half so good? And how's your hip shoulder separation so good? And then they'll say, I don't know, like they really don't know why it's like that. It's two separate countries with two players that are achieving the same things: good lower half, good hip shoulder separation. One of them just figured that out through repetition, and the other was using data-driven scientific methods. There's no wrong answer, but there are specific ways where things benefit one player more than another.
I'm curious to know kind of if you notice any differences between fan behavior and the way that fans engage with players in the United States versus in Japan.
Yeah, so I grew up watching Major League Baseball, and I've gone to, used to be Qualcomm Stadium in San Diego, not Petco Park. Growing up, I always went there. And I thought that's how baseball was supposed to be watched and viewed, and how the atmosphere should be. But then, I started looking on the internet, and you see the Mexican League, you see the Dominican League, the Winter League right now too in the Dominican. And then you watch Japanese baseball, you watch Korean baseball, you watch Taiwanese baseball, and the fans are very, very different from Major League Baseball. Japanese baseball players all have like their own chants, that there's a designated fan base that sings this. And they, to my knowledge, I think they travel too with the team. And it is very loud. It can get extremely loud. It's not really like a spectator sport at that point. They're really just, they're really part of the experience. In Major League Baseball, you feel like there's the players and then there's the fans watching. In Japan, it's like there's the Nippon Ham team with the fans included against the other team, and it's a very different atmosphere. But I think this is more fun, having the fans engaged. It's a lot more fun and rewarding too.
Do you have your own chant, or do you not get it after a year?
No, so I did get my own chant in my first year, which is crazy. I don't know. I don't even know how I got one. Um, and there's also like a different call that they do too. Like there's like different chants, and there's like calls as well. And one of them is just like they just yell Gosuke. And in Japan, like you never call someone that's older than you or that you respect by their first name. You always say Kitamura-san, right? Like you don't say Hiroshi. So like, but to me, like I don't really I'd rather be called Gosuke than Kato-san. It just doesn't sound right to me, growing up in the States. So when the fans call me Gosuke, that gets me hyped.
We're kind of wondering if you have any goals for next season or for your long-term baseball future or future outside of baseball.
Yeah, so my personal goals, and this kind of goes back to coming through the minor leagues. Through the minor leagues, I always wanted to go to the big leagues. And I never thought about going to Japan. I never thought about going to any other country. I never thought about any other job. I was going to make it to the big leagues no matter what. And then I got to the big leagues, and I didn't feel any satisfaction. For 20 years, I worked for this one goal from when I was 6 to become a big leaguer, trying to be like Ichiro, right? I finally achieved it, and I had no sense of satisfaction. And I was wondering why that was. And I figured out that through my 20 years of playing baseball and trying to get to the big leagues, and through my 10 years as a minor league baseball player, I had found a way to I didn't want my goal wasn't to get to the big leagues. It was to try to use this body that I was given as a Japanese American, and try to be the best that I can be. Like I feel like there's no ceiling, and if there is a ceiling, like I want to break through it. And that is my goal going into next season. Well, actually not just next season, but throughout my playing career. Like I don't have any personal goals other than try to be the best player that I can possibly be with this body. And in terms of team goals, we were in dead last year in the Pacific League, and we were 11th out of 12 in the whole NPB. Being dead last in the NL West, you're not getting to the World Series the next day or the next year. It's very unlikely. But in Japan, half the teams go to the playoffs, and salary caps and salary structures are very different, and free agency is very different too. So you always have a shot. I feel like next year we've made a lot of moves already in the off season, which is very uncommon in Japan. You don't really get a lot of free agents like you do in the United States. You might sign like one or two free agents, maybe one. But we've signed a bunch already, and we're making trades too. So I think next year we have a shot at winning the big thing.
Having played with players in the NPB, what was your sense of what their baseball experience was like coming up through high school, and how do you think it was different from yours in America?
Yeah, so we touched about like the practices a little, and I think obviously a lot of people can imagine what a day, for what a practice would look like from sunrise to sunset. I've never experienced it, but I think people can imagine that. But there was a story where one of our infielders told me about when he was in middle school that during their lunch break, you had to bring like a massive Tupperware full of rice, and then for lunchtime, like you had to eat all of that within like 10 minutes or something, some like ridiculous time where it's like almost impossible. And you couldn't, if you didn't finish eating that, like you had to go home, like you couldn't practice. So like these guys came up with a way to like dig in the ground and then like shove some of the rice in there, or like put like the rice in like plastic bags and like throw them over the fence into like a bush or something like that. And we weren't throwing rice over fences or burying them in the grounds. Like I don't know if you guys ever did that, in high school, but I never did. And that's when I learned, like, it's not just baseball. Like there's a lot of pressure in baseball, even in the amateur days. But these guys were experiencing a different level of pressure that I've never even thought of, like eating rice, like massive amounts of rice and having to finish that in 10 minutes or something. And I think that has a lot to do with how mentally strong these players are as well. The minor leagues here is very different because there's only two leagues. There's AAA and then there's the big leagues. So, you're 18 years old and you're in the minor leagues in AAA and you have a good year, and the next year you're in the big leagues at 19. And not a lot of American guys do that, but the Japanese guys, they handle that like very, very well. A lot of rookies make their big league debuts over here too. Guys that were drafted last year. And I think that has a lot to do with all the pressures that they went through. I just told you this really funny story of eating rice, but I think those little things really add up to mental toughness.
So I'm looking at the way pitchers are utilized in Japan versus the US, and sort of what guidelines or measures are put in place to keep high school pitchers healthy. And part of that, I'm looking at the Koshien tournament and tracking sort of pitch counts, how many appearances pitchers are making, how many days of rest they're getting, for the 2023 Koshien and the 2016 Koshien, because they implemented some new rule changes between those two. But that's sort of the gist, and comparing it to some of the guidelines like Pitch Smart in the US.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's a really good thing to study on. I know people have kind of like scratched the surface on that, but like if you dig deep, like it's really wild what these pitchers are doing over here. But things are really changing. KO University just or not university, sorry, KO High School. They won the Koshien this past year, and they they have this. They're one of the most respected high schools and universities in Japan in terms of education, and their coach is very forward thinking, and most of their practices are just managed by the players. The players kind of just do what they need to do and then they go home. And that's really different. It's very forward thinking and innovative, I think. But yeah, like that is a crazy thing to look into. And I've also read that like there were like 8 or 9 little leaguers a couple of years ago in the Tokyo area that got Tommy Johns, and like that's also very crazy too. So I don't think anyone really knows yet, which is why there's not a lot of articles or anything written about it. So I'm looking forward to what you can find, Sam. It'll be fun. I'm sure you're having fun doing this too.
It's a very, very fascinating project. It just combing through all of the box scores for the Koshien tournament was a little tedious, but it's really interesting how much you can just get from looking at the box scores. So
Yeah, it's definitely a box score that you'll never see in the US. And
yeah.
yeah, it's and this kind of goes back to my point of it's a different sport, you know. It's completely different.
Love to hear your thoughts about, you know, not just talking about the current, the contract or et cetera, but in general, what you think about Shohei Ohtani, you know, playing in Japan, coming to the US, and making such a huge impact, you know, through his two-way plays.
Yeah, from my personal experience, you know, I've always watched him on TV, and I've heard from guys, you know, like they're like, hey, like this guy Ohtani, like he's like we see him putting up these ridiculous numbers on TV, but in person, like he's even more he is just he's an alien. He's a different breed is what I was hearing. And I faced him for the first time, played against him for the first time in spring training. And Blake Snell threw a fastball around here at his face, and Ohtani uppercutted it and then hit this topspin line drive that hit the fence in left field, left center. It was a topspin line drive that hit the fence, and I was like, I'm that was the craziest thing I've ever seen, and I will never see anything like this ever again. And another, I put that in a category with 2 other players of things that I will never see in baseball again, and that was one of them. Another one is Aaron Judge hitting a home run over one of our scoreboards in spring training, and another one is Ronald Acuna hitting a triple. He was the most electric player I've ever seen, and Ohtani is a different breed, and I'm on Instagram a lot looking at like baseball like hitting tutorial or not tutorials but like hitting videos and like hitting gurus that like try to break down swings. And I love it when they like try to break down Ohtani because no one else can replicate his swing and have the same success because he is an alien, and we should all acknowledge that. No player coming off of an elbow surgery, having 1.5 Tommy Johns, is making $700 million, right? Like he is an alien. And in terms of kind of like what he's done for baseball in Japan, obviously he's a massive star, and he's giving back to all the Japanese little leaguers or elementary school players too. I think he gave like a glove to every elementary school kid, which is absolutely wild. And he uses his platform and his abilities very well. And he knows the power that he has, and he uses it with very very well, I think. And he's changed the game in a lot of ways. Like what Kitamura-san said, like he's a two-way player, so MLB had to change the rules for him. And then he, with this contract, like we're seeing all these deferrals, we're seeing all these contract things we've never seen in anyone's contracts before. Like something just came out today where if the GM or the owner gets fired, like he gets an opt-out. Like he's not in it for the money. He's just in it to see what he can do in Major League Baseball, and see what his potential is. And I think we saw that first when I think he forfeited like a couple $100 million by coming to MLB early. I think he got posted before he was 25 or something, and that was a big deal because he was losing out on so much money. But I just love that about him. Like he's just such a pioneer in terms of not just being a two-way player like on the field stuff, but off the field, like he's making all these things that only a pioneer would do, like not just in this contract with almost $680 million in deferrals, but a lot of other things will come out as well that will have people scratching their heads, but he knows he made the right choice, and all the other players can just just acknowledge that. Yeah.
Well, I think our eyes will be glued to his press conference in several hours, I think, that we held at Dodger Stadium. So we'll see what he has to say. Yeah. Okay, well, we went a little over time. Sorry about that, Gosuke-san. But this was such a wonderful, amazing, fascinating opportunity for us. Wanted to thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you guys are welcome. Good luck with all of this, and Sam, good luck with your Koshian project as well. I'm looking forward to that.